Husky fans, you made it. There's just one more day until the season starts. So how are we going to celebrate? We're going to give you some full season predictions. We're going to talk a little bit about recruiting, and it's time for the first ever Locked On Huskies mailbag.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yet another Friday edition of Locked On Huskies. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We write for Inside the Huskies with Fan Nation and Sports Illustrated. You can check out all our work over there at si.com/college/Washington. Lars, we made it. I know we've talked about it all week. The season is officially here. It's so exciting to just, again, talk about real football. We're going to give everybody some full season predictions today, some record predictions, maybe some bold ones. We love doing that here on Locked On Huskies. We're going to talk about some recruiting, and then we're going to get into some of your questions. We got some good YouTube questions. We got a lot of great Twitter questions. Shoot us a follow at Locked On Huskies on Twitter, and you can always ask us questions there. We'll try to reply to some of the ones that we might not be able to, get to over the course of this episode. But first, before we get into any of that, I have to remind everybody that this episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. You know what, Lars? Let's jump right into it here. I feel like it's really funny. We've got a lot of reviews on iTunes, especially saying that we agree with each other too much, which is really funny because that's just what our entire friendship has been, just agreeing with us, with each other, just about so many things that are going on because we see things in similar lights. But I feel like that's not going to happen today. So everybody out there that listens and just says, these guys agree with each other too much, I feel like today might be the day where you don't get a lot of that. So you're welcome for that. Lars, let's jump right into it here. What do you think the Huskies record in 2023 is going to be?
Are we going, just to be clear, are we doing regular season or are we doing cumulative? Because I think it's probably going to be 11.
Do whatever you want.
Because I think it's going to be 11. They're going to lose one game in the regular season, but they're going to still make it to the Pac-12 championship, which I believe would get them to 11-1, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if that math totally checks out, but basically I have one loss in the regular season. I don't believe they're going to be able to beat USC, but I believe they're going to beat them in the Pac-12 championship game. So that's kind of where my difference is going to be. I think they should be able to run the table.
So that would put them at 12-1.
12-1. Okay, that was my curious math. Yeah. And then from there, it just matters of who they're able to draw in the college football playoff. And as long as I believe a Pac-12 champion makes it, but a one-loss non-Pac-12 champion doesn't make it. So I think that'll kind of be the discrepancy there. But I don't see I think there are going to be some close games and some games that are surprisingly close, but I don't think they're going to lose them, kind of similar to last year where aside from UCLA and Arizona State, where they had so many injuries to overcome, and they almost actually overcame UCLA. They almost won that game at the very, very end. So I think this team is built to almost run the table. I think they're just going to have one little hiccup. I don't see any other team other than USC truly being able to contend with Washington. So I think give me 12-1.
I like that a lot. And I actually also am going to go 12-1, but I don't know if that loss is going to come at USC. I just, after watching them against San Jose State, I'm not necessarily super impressed with what their defense put out there. And Alex Grinch, who is somebody who, has become a little bit of a punching bag on the show and definitely will continue to be one over the course of the season, which I am personally okay with. I'm sure you are as well. But I don't know if that loss is going to come at USC. The more I look at the schedule, I feel like the loss is going to just come in a road stumble. I think that the USC game is going to be a lot like what the Oregon game was last year, where it's a big game, it's a big environment, and the Huskies are going to live up to that challenge. I think that what might be a little scary in the long run is if there's one game that I am just going to look at and say, yeah, this is the game I think they end up losing, I think it's Oregon State. That's always such a tough environment. It's a real tough place to play, especially after all the renovations. And Oregon State right now still is without a conference really for 2024 because we're not counting the Pac-4 or Pac-2 if this ACC thing ends up going through. But I think that they're really just going to want to just punch some people in the mouth on the way out. And I think that that's going to end up being where the loss comes, just because like I said, it's a tough place to play. That's a really good defense. Jonathan Smith did a really good job last year. And yeah, granted, that was a weird weather game for the Huskies, but I just think that, yeah, they'll end up playing USC again in the Pac-12 championship game. I do think they end up beating them there and getting to the college football playoff. So I will also say that they end the regular season at 11-1. And if I put that in air quotes because some people want to include the Pac-12 championship game in the regular season. So I will also go with a 12-1 season for the Huskies before, we get to bowl games and everything like that.
See, I agree with your take that I think that's going to be one of my close games, the Oregon State game. But here's the problem that kind of Washington's going to run in there. You can afford to lose to Oregon and USC because those two teams are going to be ranked probably in the top 10 or 15, somewhere USC probably in the top 5. So you can afford to, drop down a couple of spots. But if you lose to Oregon State, especially if Oregon State's maybe a top 25 team, maybe it doesn't hurt as much, but I still think that's going to knock them down a few more pegs than it would have lost to USC. Because if let's say they come into that Oregon game ranked number 8 in the country, 9 in the country, 7 in the country, somewhere in that range, and they win, you probably move up to number 5. USC is probably number 4 or 3, and then whoever wins that, they're not going to fall. It's almost like the SEC championship, where like, okay, do they really fall that far? Or do you meet again in the championship game versus Oregon State? That one I think would hurt a lot more from a perception standpoint, even though it is on the road. And that's a good point. I just think that one would be an optically worse result.
So I disagree with you from the standpoint that I think this is going to be a really good Oregon State team. That I think that they're going to really surprise some people this year. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're a top 20 team by the time this matchup rolls around. And, the Huskies are, just from the logic that I put out there so far, that they're undefeated going into that game. I don't think that it would be a huge knock like, oh yeah, they went on the road to a top 20 team and yeah, they lost they probably lose that game by 3 points. It's not going to be like Oregon State's going to blow them out at any point. And it's something where how much is that really going to hurt in the long run? Where let's say, because by the way that these standings would end up going, they still find their way into the Pac-12 championship game. And if they're able to do that and beat USC again, it's, oh yeah, they beat USC twice. Who cares about this one little stumble to a ranked team? Those things happen, especially on the road.
And that's a fair point. I guess that would be kind of the contingent, since the one loss that I have is to USC. I guess, yeah, I could. That would be the only other plausible scenario to where they have to win every other game from here on out, from there on out. And I think when we saw last season when they lost to UCLA and then they lost the next week to Arizona State, it's kind of like, okay, well that's kind of where you get into a dicey proposition, and that's obviously where the Pac-12 championship game goes out of the way at that point. So I think if they're able to have that as their only loss, then I could see a path, but then it almost becomes, well, who's the other one-loss team in the conference, or is there a two-loss team in the conference, and Washington is regardless at the top of the conference? I think that's just it's going to be an interesting way to split hairs, and I think certainly Oregon State's not going to be an easy task. I agree with you there. I just don't think that if Washington were to lose, even though it's on the road to Oregon State, that would be a little more of an indictment. It would be like losing to Arizona State last year. And you would just have to – and with that game, that was also – Michael Penix didn't throw a touchdown. There were so many injuries in that game. There was a lot of other mitigating factors. If you don't have those mitigating factors and you lose to Oregon State, regardless of whether a top 20, 25 team in the country, I just don't think that one's a little harder of a sell. It's like when you're looking at the end of it, okay, Alabama lost to Georgia or Alabama lost to Tennessee as a top 10 team. Okay, we'll play them again in the championship game, versus if Alabama loses to Kentucky or if Alabama loses to Mississippi State, then that those losses are viewed differently. Again, Alabama's kind of the outlier on that one, but I think the point still stands where it's like, okay, the optics are going to be the key in this one.
You're absolutely right, but that's kind of where I'm saying I don't know if it's going to hurt as much if this team kind of lives up to expectations. They're ranked right now, and I think that they have a pretty favorable schedule for the most part. So if this is a 9-10 win Oregon State team, I don't think it's going to hurt very much in the long run, which is more where I wanted to go with this. But I do have to take a minute here. I got to remind the good folks at home about Gametime. Lars, buying tickets can be really stressful, but we know that firsthand, but Gametime, that makes it not stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have. Like I've said before, especially with the Mariners in first place in the AL West, I want to buy some tickets. I want to make sure that I can go see that run because the Red Sox are out of it. I need to stop talking about the Red Sox. And when I start using Gametime to buy these tickets, when there's no football going on, I want to be able to use their flash deals, their last minute tickets, and the great images of the seat views. Gametime is the place for last minute tickets. Forget planning months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. The Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you for 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress of Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Let's talk some recruiting. This is something we talked about a lot after some of the shows that we've recorded this week, and we were just kind of like, how are we going to work this in? How are we going to talk about recruiting on the show? So the first thing, the only real big news that we can talk about recently that's happened in the recruiting world, I don't know if we've talked about Jason Brown's top 3 of Michigan State, Oregon, and Washington, but we'll get into that. The biggest news is 4-star safety from Texas, Josh Lair, has officially rescheduled his UW official visit. He was going to come up during one of the big official visit weekends the Huskies host at the end of June. He ended up canceling that and now has rescheduled, and he'll be here on September 8th, which is the weekend of the Tulsa game. So that's if the Huskies are able to pull in a commitment from him, that would be a huge win for this coaching staff.
It would, and I think also kind of when you look down the depth as we were talking about the past couple of days, you definitely want to keep the 4-stars coming in, especially in the secondary, because that's kind of one position where they're going to have – I mean, they reloaded last year at cornerback. Now you're going to want to reload at safety. They don't necessarily have a ton of guaranteed depth in terms of, these guys are going to be 3 and 4 year starters behind Asa and Dom Hampton. There we go. Sorry. My apologies, Dom. I was trying to think of who the other safety was over there. Everybody's still getting used to all the changes and everybody moving around. But I think beyond those two, there's not really anybody committed long-term to say, hey, you know what, that's going to be our next safety of the future. They do have Vincent Holmes, and he's going to be a redshirt freshman. So I don't necessarily think it would be the worst thing in the world to continue to bring in another younger guy, because we know, and we're going to talk about it later, they're probably going to bring in somebody from the portal anyway. So I think you just want to keep stacking bodies. And it's also, I mean, when you look at Josh Lair's list, Washington being in that mix, that's a pretty big statement. Not just to get a kid from the state of Texas, because, again, that's not a new feature for Washington. They've always kind of done that, especially in the past couple of staffs. But to get a massive 4-star safety that Alabama has hosted for a visit, I believe Tennessee also was in there, right? Or there's some
LSU,
other SEC
too, yeah. Exactly.
And so there's a ton of SEC schools. So it's not like he's a passed over player. I think this is a player that a lot of schools want. And the fact that Washington is getting him in the season, I think is a massive statement.
And I don't think they're just in the mix. I think they might be one of the favorites to land a commitment from him. There were some, I won't go into some of the specifics, but there were a lot of things that I'd heard over the summer where it sounded like they might have been the leader at multiple points, and other things happened which caused him to cancel the official visit. But now that it's back on, if all those things are still holding true, I think that they might end up even being the favorite. Sorry, no, go ahead, please.
I was going to say that's a great point, because actually, if we think about the weekend that he was supposed to come in on the July 23rd weekend, that was the weekend that the staff had targeted for all the guys that they wanted to get committed in the boat. And if he was coming in the second or third week in June, maybe it's a guy they obviously want, but maybe not as high. I think the fact that they're going out of their way to reschedule a visit, I think that, to your point, that just speaks to how badly they want him and how high he also views them, because nobody has to take a visit during the season, especially. And the fact that you're going all the way from Texas to the upper left to come to Seattle, I think that speaks pretty high volumes. And I think this is maybe more of a closing visit than a fact-finding mission.
I totally agree. Do you think that they take any other defensive backs in this class?
No, I mean, not as a recruit. I think after the season, other additions will come, but I don't think specifically from a high school standpoint now.
So just 30 seconds here. Where does that leave 4-star safety Kyan McDonald from O'Day?
That's kind of a tough one, because I don't necessarily know if they want him as a true safety. Maybe he could play.
I've heard they want him at corner. Yeah.
Right. And there's a few positions that they could have. And especially when you take they took 4 cornerbacks last year. Three, but then you have Elias Johnson coming in, and you also had Barkins and Muhammad. Muhammad's already gone, but Barkins is going to be more than a 1-year player. So I just think from a depth perspective, they're covered with numbers. They might take a transfer just to even out the numbers from a class standpoint, but I don't think you want to get another younger true freshman in that mix.
We're going to continue to go quick hitters here. Running back, is it Jason Brown or bust here?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, at this point, I would be very surprised if Washington found another option at running back. I think Brown's pretty much, if they're going to take a guy, it's going to be him. Otherwise, they're probably just going to pass and maybe go back to the portal again.
Yeah, they've taken 4 running backs in the transfer portal in 2 years. I wouldn't be surprised if they went that route instead, if Brown decides that Michigan State or Oregon is a better fit for him. First, real quick here before we keep going, I got to remind everybody about Locked On College Football Live. College football season is here, and this season, Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On College Football Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, conference rivalry games, and go in depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College Football hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on any Locked On College YouTube channel, including this one right here. You won't want to miss it. All right, so there are really only two. We can talk about linebacker a little bit, but that seems like something where we got a good a couple of questions that'll involve the transfer portal in our next segment. So let's just say real quick, Jericho Johnson. What are we talking about here?
I mean, it's going to be Washington or USC for him in the end. And I think as the season goes along, the more he stays uncommitted, I think there's a fair shot, especially with who, Noki Breckterfield, his pedigree, everything that kind of is going with Washington. And I think the important thing for Jericho is going to be how is the development in the second year in the scheme with the defensive linemen? Because they did a good job last year. They were okay. They weren't terrible. They weren't world stars either. I think this year we both expect that interior group to take a next step. And I think that'll kind of be another selling point for Jericho to say, you know what, I'm willing to take that shot.
No, I agree. I think that it's felt like it's been Washington in the lead for a while here. USC is going to make a late push. Oregon's going to make a late push. But it just feels like Washington has had the longest and just most solid relationship with, in my opinion, the best defensive tackle in the country in this recruiting cycle. He's so impressive on film, and I think that he's somebody who the coaching staff wants to close, but obviously they don't want to put a lot of pressure on him and then just say, I'm not feeling it. I want to wait till December. I'm not ready to do this, and then they end up losing him to USC. And it's something where if we kind of just watch the defensive line play of both those schools this year, I think it'll show a lot about what Jericho wants to do when I think we both believe he ends up signing with Washington in December. And then finally, I think the only real other position that we need to talk about is offensive line, where Ascentre Afua has committed to Texas A&M. He's number 2 prospect, I believe, still, or maybe number 3, as these rankings are so fluid. Offensive lineman from O'Day High School has committed to Texas A&M. Do you think that there are still multiple spots along this offensive line open, or do you think that there's maybe 1 or even 0 left?
I think it's fair to say there's 1. I mean, it would take attrition to have another one, which again is always possible. But then again, I think that's kind of where they've shown they got Jalen Clem in the transfer portal this past year to balance out the class and numbers. I think that would be the route that they would go after taking 1 more high school prospect. I don't necessarily think there's going to be 2 spots for high school prospects.
I agree. And it does sound like that spot right now is that the favorite for it is Ignacio Tupu, a 3-star offensive tackle from Palo Alto, who's a really talented kid, just a massive frame, just like so many other guys that Scott Huff has taken over these last couple of classes.
I mean, Scott Huff loves that's one thing about Scott that, he got unjustly ripped in 2021 for everything, and he did not deserve any of those shots. I just need to make that very clear. And I think even before then and since then, he has recruited the exact same type of lineman. There's always a type that he wants. And every now and then you'd be like, okay, I don't know how that guy necessarily fits. And then 2 years later, that guy's Trey Fatana. It's like all of a sudden, like, wow, okay, he's a good prospect. Not great, not 4 or 5 star, but he's good. But he coaches and develops them in, and he's just got a system that works perfectly. And so I think he's a natural fit for it.
Now, it's time for the mailbag. I'm really excited to get this going. We really want to make sure that we engage with all the fans that listen to the show, all the everydayers out there, as much as we possibly can. So we wanted to just kind of get some of your questions before the season started. And this being our Friday show, we thought no better time to just kind of lead into a game than by answering your questions. So first, we want to go to YouTube here at Blazers2796. Asks, can you go over the hypothetical scenario of how the season would have been different if the Huskies didn't lose at ASU last year? Do you want to kick us off? I read you this one before the show, and you had some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, there's some context that has to be applied because they still had the injuries last year.
Yep.
So it's almost like that game was a result. Yeah, I mean, yes, that was the one game Michael Penix didn't throw a touchdown. I believe that's correct. So that is obviously one problem, but there were so many other problems going against Washington, especially on defense in that game, that I think, okay, if they don't lose to Arizona State, what does that mean? That like, how did they not lose to Arizona State? It was like there were so many injuries. I think that was kind of a back-to-back trap game for them after UCLA, which actually was also a close game. So I think, yes, this season probably would have turned out relatively similar, if not even better, because I don't think that if you beat Arizona State, you're not then losing to Oregon. This isn't a trade-off here. So I think, okay, they would be 11-1, then you probably go to the Pac-12 championship, and then again, okay, that's now where you have a toss-up. Is it USC? Is it Washington? I still think probably Washington loses that game last year just because of the defensive side of the game. And obviously, when you lose to UCLA, it's like, okay, can you beat USC? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not, again, they were good. I'm not, they were 10-2, 11-2. They beat Texas, top 20 team in Texas's backyard effectively. So it's not that Washington couldn't have hung, but I just think last season ended how it should have, sets up the season perfectly because if you beat Arizona State, truly nothing really changes other than you make the Pac-12 championship game more than likely. But maybe you go to a different bowl game. Maybe you lose that bowl game.
So this is what I think. I disagree because I think they do beat USC. If the defense is healthy, I feel like that's a different story. We kind of saw them starting to get right towards the end of the year. The Oregon game, obviously they had their ups and downs, and defending Bo Nix was tough. And yeah, we do have to remember that Caleb Williams did get hurt in the Pac-12 championship game against Utah, but I think that they find a way to win that game. I do think that if that happens, though, they get held out of the college football playoff because of their strength of schedule, but they end up in the Rose Bowl, and I really don't think that that's a bad second option. So if we're doing revisionist history here, I do think that, because I think that just kind of one thing that needs to be considered is that loss to Arizona State kind of energized everybody because it's just kind of this we can't lose again from here attitude. Where does that same attitude necessarily happen if they win that game? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe they drop one of those games after that. Who knows? But I do think that they end up making the Rose Bowl from that, because even if USC does beat them, USC does go to the Pac-12, to the college football playoff, and Washington still probably ends up in the Rose Bowl. So as we keep going here, Brandon C on Twitter asks, do you think that Cameron Davis going down means that Dylan Johnson gets enough carries for 1,000+ rushing yards this year?
I mean, he's certainly 1,000-yard capable back. I just don't know if he's going to get the number of touches. And the reason I say that is, yes, he is the starting running back. He is going to be the lead back for the majority of the season. That said, with Will Nixon and Daniel Ngata being the two primary backs behind him, I will acknowledge Sam Adams and Richard Newton as well. But I think the former two are going to play more of a role than the latter two. I just don't know. I think he could get to maybe 800 or 900. I just don't that 1,000 yards. I mean, if you look last year, Cam Davis is the only returning running back that had the most amount of touchdowns. And I believe he didn't have 1,000 yards, but he was like one of the more productive running backs in the country returning. It's not hard. It's not easy to get to that 1,000-yard. I mean, when you look at Myles Gaskin, he had to carry every single time. When Savon Ahmed got his 1,000 yards, he had to get, I want to say, 3 or 4 carries in the first half against a certain team to barely get over that 1,000-yard mark. So it wouldn't be a knock for Dylan to get there. I think touchdowns matter more than yards at this point for this team this year.
I agree. And so I also agree. I don't think he gets over 1,000 rushing yards, but I do think he gets over 1,000 total yards.
Oh, yeah.
Like very easily. I think he might even be able to touch somewhere close to 1,500 total. I think that's one of my bold predictions for the year, that he can get to that 1,500 total yards mark, which is something that Wayne Talapapa got to, I believe, 1,100 or 1,200 last year. And Dylan Johnson, no knock to Wayne, Dylan Johnson is just a much better receiver. So I think that's something that wouldn't necessarily be very tough for him. All right. Lou Dog asks, what impact does having such a young, deep team have on recruiting with a brand on the rebound, especially headed into the Big Ten? How would a coach weigh that balance for those elite recruits that feel they should have playing time from the start? Competition breeds success, but the portal impacts that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think the way that Kalen DeBoer likes to build his program, you're always going to have a mix of portal and high school players. And I think the staff has proven that they're not going to spend what Arizona's spending and what Oregon's spending when it comes to high school recruits to get the 4 and 5 stars. They'd rather wait a couple of years and say, hey, after you're maybe on the rebound in the portal, or if you're just looking for a new home or whatever the case may be, when you're proven, or at least when you've shown you can play at a college level. I mean, look at Jabbar Muhammad. He did it for 1 year at Oklahoma State. That's good enough. I mean, he's a junior, but again, all you really got to do is show that you can hang for 1 year, and we're willing to go and get you out of the portal. I think that's more UW's route and how they're going to rebuild to balance. You're going to always want to have a balance, probably a 60-40, 70-30 balance. Usually you want to have more high school and offset with transfers. But I think with this team being so young and so deep, to the question's point, you almost are more driven to go to the portal than you are to get every single high school recruit that you want.
I agree there. And I think that one thing that we also need to kind of think about here, that this 2024 class is going to be on the smaller side. And I think that there's a lot of smoke coming out of some of the sources that I know we both talked to saying, yeah, this 2025 class is going to be big. It's going to be talented. It's going to be much better. But it's something where it feels like, to your point, that they want to build, especially 2024 through the portal, because it's something we'll talk about on other shows, is there's going to be a lot of guys that leave after this year for the NFL draft. Another bold prediction that I have is the Huskies are going to have the most players drafted this year out of any team in the country. I think that's very possible. So that's not something where you want to, in your first year in the Big Ten, just plug everything with, oh yeah, this, like, then no knock on either of these guys, because we're very high on both of them. It's like, oh yeah, Maurice Himes and Lance Holtzclaw are starting edges. They've played like 7 career games, but yeah, now these guys are starting in the Big Ten. That's not how this is going to go. We're going to see a lot of portal reinforcements, probably a lot of 1 year plug and play guys as this 2023, 2024, and this class 2025 all start to develop and take shape. So there's going to be a lot of competition, yes, but I think that we're going to start to see that 2 years down the line, not necessarily in 2024.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if you look at, let's say, cornerback, or even actually, we'll go to your edges example. Actually, to your point, there would have a transfer from this past class have more of an impact than those two.
I like that.
Exactly. Yep. So I think there's always a way to make the point. I mean, think about it. Jalen Clem is another example. He's now listed as a backup left tackle behind Troy Fatana as a redshirt freshman. Okay. Right. Much like Landon Hatchett, does he play a lot of games this season? Probably not. But I think it is an indicator of where they're looking down the road. And then you also still have Elijah Jaquette and a bunch of other 4-stars that are kind of behind Clem. So it's like you want that balance. And then, hey, you know what? I mean, we see it right now at left guard. We got 2 former 4-stars battling it out and beat out by a 3-star right guard.
Yep. I want to get to my favorite question here, because I have a little mini anecdote on this one. Tyler Browning asks, how many pets does Dubs the Husky deserve? I want you to go first here.
All of them.
All
yes. Of them.
The answer.
All of them in the world. All of them in the world.
The answer is infinite pets. And I just quick side note here. One of my favorite. I love standing on the sideline at the end of games. It's really fun to be able to do that. There was a game during my first season covering the team in 2021 where I'm just standing there, and all of a sudden, just like my dog Rocky, who is now passed on, used to do. I had my hand hanging down at my side, and all of a sudden I felt a wet nose and just a dog up under my hand. And I looked down, and it's Dubs. And I was like, oh my God, this never happens. He never does this. He never comes up to people. They have to, and something we talked about a little bit before the show was there's always a group of people around him who are just shielding him because they're just like, yeah, no, he's too popular. And the fact that I got that recognition from him was just A1. That was incredible. Final question here. Too Much Camber asks, do you see the pass defense improving with the addition of Jabbar Muhammad, and will the second year of this new scheme come together?
Can't be any worse. And yeah, I mean, I think that's specifically the reason you bring Jabbar in, is also not only just to be a plug and play guy, but then it also allows the guys that were playing last year to develop, be more of a depth piece so that they can come down the road. I think it's a win-win all around.
I like that a lot. I think that yes. And I think the biggest things here, there are 2 for me. One is, yes, Jabbar Muhammad is going to make a big impact. And there are more guys this year that fit the scheme better, because the scheme is man up. They love playing single coverage on the outside, which is a lot of fun to watch. I think it's a fun way for not only to just kind of watch a defense be run, but it's more fun for the guys in the scheme because they want to do that, because they know that's the biggest challenge for them. And second, there's no way that the injuries in this room are as bad as they were last year, with everybody going down at a different point. And I do think, just kind of as a quick side note, there is a lot of talent in this room. We love Thaddeus Dixon. We've been really impressed by Devon Banks. This room is a little bit deeper than it was last year too. And it's not like it's at the level that we've talked about previously of, oh yeah, it's Trent McDuffie, it's Kyler Gordon, it's these guys are waiting in the wings. But Caleb Presley's really talented. Curly Reed's really talented. Leroy Bryant is really talented. There are a lot of guys that are just kind of waiting that it's like, oh yeah, no, this is exciting. And we probably won't get to see a lot of them this year, but there's a lot to be excited about in the secondary.
I completely agree. Yeah, I think that's also why you don't bring a ton of guys in this class, is because you know what you have coming 2, 3, 4 years down the road.
Right. Lars, as always, I want to thank you for being here with us today. And I want to thank everybody out there for watching. Make sure you follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. We're there. Follow our Twitter accounts at Tomashoff34, at Lars Hanson, and at Locked On Huskies. That's where most of the questions for this were submitted. We're going to try to do more mailbags, so please feel free to follow us on Twitter and just tweet at us with those questions. We will try to acknowledge as many as we possibly can. Be sure to drop us a 5-star review, follow, subscribe, leave us a thumbs up, listen every day. And by the time you hear us again, there will be a real football game that has been played. We'll talk to you on Monday.